Hi, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 16th episode of the story about the time when Sasuke gives his sharingan eyes to Naruto on verge death in waves. Let's watch as Naruto Uzumaki, Uchiha takes world by storm. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Ibiki was an intimidating presence standing like a statue in the front of room 301, staring at the examinees while randomly flashing minute amounts of killing intent to increase the tension. He did another sweep of the classroom with his cold black eyes and silently observed the different methods being used by the sharingan. There are some worthy candidates in this exam, however most of them don't have what it takes yet. That's my job though, to weed out the incompetents. The bear-like Shinobi silently laughed when another inept ninja's number was called, that is until the boy from Kuza rose up angrily and slammed his fist on the table. That's bullcrap, there's no way you can know. Your eyes are completely covered by wrappings. The blue-haired proctor calmly placed his clipboard onto his knees. You're so hopeless that I didn't even need to see to know you were cheating. Now get out. It was apparent the teen wasn't going to listen, so Ibiki used the Kanashibari no Jutsu and directed a concentrated blast of murderous intent that froze the unruly contestant. That's enough, you're only embarrassing yourself and your village. Don't make excuses for your lack of skill or cunning. Develop your skills for next exam instead, or stay pathetic for the rest of your life, which I'm sure will be brief if you pick the latter. The Kuza sharingan almost fell over when Ibiki released his technique and hurriedly walked out of the room. His teammates slowly pushed their chairs away from the table and followed the retreating boy while furiously staring at his back. The remaining contestants went back to work and the intimidating shinobi resumed his scan of the room. He saw the veins bulging around the two Hyuga's eyes and his sharp ears could make out the soft yip of a dog. The head of Tondi then found his mentor's daughter after hearing a thump in the room that made him look up at a blonde girl who appeared to be asleep. He hoped she got marked for that. Clans were at an obvious disadvantage because their abilities were known, so as long as they weren't overt with their skills the proctors wouldn't mark them down. However, using them carelessly like she did would get your score lowered. Ibiki's charcoal eyes drifted up to meet the gaze of the six-armed Otonin who smirked like he just pulled one over on the special jounin. Who does this kid think he's fooling? The scarred man kept his eyes locked on the sharingan while calling out to one of the proctors, Miyagi, remind me to call an exterminator. He put extra emphasis on the last word and blasted a wave of murderous intent at Kitamaru while giving him a bone-chilling smile. The boy reflexively shivered in his seat and Ibiki continued, it appears we have a spider's nest somewhere in the building. The Otonin's head dropped with his shit-eating grin, and the head proctor continued observing the room. The scarred interrogator caught the light getting reflected off the mirrors at the top of the room and saw there were wires attached. He followed them down to a Konoha girl that was adjusting them while staring at the back of the guy clone. Apparently somebody had taken tests in this room before. Ibiki gave the kunoichi a knowing smirk that made her quickly duck her head before watching the Hyuga girl deactivate her Byakugan and begin tapping her pencil on her desk. Coincidentally, the Suna puppeteer on her team picked up his pencil and started scribbling hastily on the empty sheet in front of him. Ibiki was impressed by their teamwork despite the different villages. I wonder how the other bi-village team is doing. He looked up at Kakashi's brats who were operating like a well-oiled machine. That pink-haired girl finished the questions in 15 minutes, then the proctor felt her pale teammates molding his chakra before several mice ran up to her desk and dissolved on the paper, then reformed several seconds later. After that they returned to their creator and the Suna kunoichi on the team before dissolving once more. That kid's a smooth operator, I doubt anyone else here noticed that besides me. Hell, I might not have even caught it if I hadn't trained myself to sense chakra being molded. Ibiki looked up at the clock to see that it was nearing the 50-minute mark, time to up the pressure. After he quietly signaled the other proctors, they started to leak out traces of murderous intent and subtly raised it over the next couple of minutes. The tension hit its peak as the head examiner spoke when the second hand on the clock reached 12 and the minute hand ticked forward slightly, pencils down. It's time for the 10th question. There's a catch to this one though. If you get it wrong then you can never take the Chunin exam again. Anyone can leave now. Just raise your hands. And he was interrupted when the red-headed girl from sound let out a snore and his brow twitched in irritation. You might want to wake up 154. Your career is on the line here. If you sleep through this question and get it wrong then you'll never be a Chunin. In case you missed my explanation, it's possible to withdraw now. I'd understand completely. It's pretty risky considering you can try again next time. She slowly lifted her head and gave him an annoyed frown. Why'd you wake me up for this bullshit? You don't have the authority to do that. Not even the Hokage has that authority. You're obviously bluffing. If that was one of the requirements to enter this exam it would have been boycotted. Ibiki's cool eyes stared frostily at the girl while the proctors that were closest to her started ramping up the key. However, the redhead was unperturbed by it all and sat confidently like there was no way she could be wrong. The man could tell she wasn't bluffing too because there wasn't a shred of doubt anywhere in the girl's posture, and no child would be able to completely hide that. Hell, a lot of Jounin couldn't either. He silently cursed when her confidence started rubbing off on everyone else and tried to crush it quickly. Those are big words for a little fish. Tell me, Jinan, are you willing to risk your entire career on them? Karen didn't rise to the bait, instead she just sat there unflinchingly with a triumphant look on her face. Nobody was raising their hands anymore and Iviki's sharp mind raced to think of a substitute 10th question. Maybe if I reworked the scenario I was going to give them and allow them to get back together in teams before explaining it. Damn it. I didn't think that a Jinan would be able to think clearly under this much pressure. That's what I get for underestimating them though. Oh well, it's not like Honko is going to complain about more teams passing, although I'm going to hear about it forever. Last chance maggots. He blasted them with a wave of killing intent that shook the contestants, but didn't dissuade anybody. Everyone here was ready for the 10th question. Fine, you all pass. Iviki purposefully ignored the kunoichi's smirk, although I doubt half of you would have stayed if it wasn't for 154. This was supposed to test your mettle, if you were willing to risk your future without knowing what was coming. If you're not, then you should leave now because you'll never make it as a chunin. Tamari glared angrily at the bearish man. So what the hell was the point of the other 9 questions if you were going to pass us anyways? Information. Everybody looked at the special Jounin confusedly, to test your ability to gather information. Not everyone specializes in it, but every ninja should be capable enough to get by. The limit of 5 was to simulate suspicion. If you do something strange once or twice, people won't give you a second glance, but any more than that and you'd start to stand out. It was also to prove that no matter how much information was gathered, you can never be sure of it or the future. Information is the lifeblood of Shinobi and many times is the difference between life or death, failure and success. But it can always be faked. However, even if you think the information was falsified, you cannot turn your back on a mission. The man pulled back the bandana he wore, revealing a hideously scarred head. A true shinobi knows that the future is always uncertain and puts his life on the line anyways. That is one of the traits necessary to become a chunin. Now the interrogator was cut off again when a light brown tarp wrapped up like a ball burst through the large windows. It unfolded and kunai knives stuck into the ceiling and floor, revealing the writing inside that said, "The proctor for the second exam, the incredibly sexy and single Mitarashi Anko." A scantily clad woman in her 20s wearing only a trench coat, fishnet bodysuit, and an incredibly short orange miniskirt over it with her violet hair pulled back into a spiked ponytail stood in front of it. "Don't get too excited, pussies, because I'm your next proctor and the second exam is about to." Anko trailed off and leaned closer while counting the remaining Jinan with her finger. 204 Jinan Iviki, 68 teams? Did you enjoy a delicious brunch with them, or maybe let them take relaxing a nap before the real challenge? Oh, I know. I bet you had them organize your stuffed animal collection. You've been talking about that for a long time. A gloved hand made its way to Iviki's scarred face before sliding down to his chin. "You're early, Anko." They got off on a technicality and I was going to give them a backup question I had planned, but then I figured, why ruin your fun? The woman seemed to tingle with excitement while answering with a sweet tone, "You're too kind. I can't wait to smell all the delicious crimson blood that's going to get spilt." She turned towards the nervous Jinan with a bloodthirsty grin. "Hurry along now, kiddies, it's playtime." "Well, I'll enjoy it at least. Now get a move on and follow me. Unlike my colleague here, I'm going to make sure at least half of you are gone by the end of my portion." Anko jumped out the broken window and the examinees shuddered before hesitantly following the psychotic woman like they were walking to the gallows, except for Jinan from sound. They followed excitedly, knowing it would be far more than half. The gate finally opened and 3 blurs jumped into the canopy and leapt through the massive trees into the forest of death. After going nearly half a mile, they skidded to a stop and a bandaged Jinan questioned the red-headed girl on their team. "Okay, Karen, what's this all about?" The kunoichi just shrugged with an irritating grin on her face. "What makes you two think I know?" The boy wearing a yellow shirt with the kanji for death on it sneered. "You were completely pathetic in basic training and were only good at sensing. They thought you were so useless that you weren't even put on a team. Then all of a sudden you come back with some impressive jutsu, and we were told to listen to your orders. It seems a little suspicious." Karen laughed derisively at the brown-haired boy. "Did Dosa tell you all that, Zaku?" It was surprisingly well thought out, especially coming from somebody with a pea-sized brain. "But tell me, why would Orochimaru-sama tell his plans to a Jinan? I'm sure the other 3 know, but they're not exactly Jinan. Then how do you explain such a rapid improvement for somebody labeled incompetent?" The redhead flicked her hair while facing her mummified teammate. "You shouldn't be jealous because I'm strong without Orochimaru's enhancements, Tosu. Your guys' balls will drop someday, and then you'll become real men." They both tightened in anger, but Karen knew the duo wouldn't be able to do anything if they had the guts to try. She could sense their nervousness. "You two need to learn to relax and take a joke. I have a lot of chakra, so it was hard to control as a child, but now it's a major boon. Now if you want to know what's going on, crack open the fake hit I ate because they told us the orders are in there." They all undid their headbands before breaking them in half and snatching two pieces of paper that fluttered in the air. One had their mission objectives written down, and the other had a map of the forest with X marks near the perimeter. Karen ignored the written orders because she already knew them. Instead, the redhead intently studied the map. She glanced up and saw their eyes widen as Dosu looked up at her with an anxious glint in his. "So this is what's going on." The kunoichi nodded while looking back at her map before they did the same. "We entered gate 17, so we need to go to this meeting area. It's about 3 miles from here." She turned her map around and pointed to the red X closest to them before taking off with her teammates following excitedly. It didn't take long for the shinobi to arrive, and they saw some familiar faces. Sakon, Kitamaru, and Jirobo were waiting impatiently in the canopy of the large trees, and Karen looked up at the boys with a wicked smirk. "This worked out perfectly. Are you guys ready?" The three older ninja jumped down and Kitamaru's 6 arms began twitching excitedly. "Of course, the sooner the trash gets here the better." Minutes later, a team from Tanigakura arrived. It was 3 boys all around a year older than Karen's team wearing matching uniforms, light blue pants with a skin-tight black t-shirt on under a dark blue vest. The one in the middle was the shortest of the 3. He had light brown hair with an angular face, and his lips were set in a frown. The shinobi on his left was incredibly thin, almost emaciated, with large flaps of skin hanging from his skeletal frame, and long black hair that stopped at his shoulder blades. The final member had green hair that came down to the middle of his round cheeks that curved up in a smile. "Hello, my name is Aki, the chubby fellow on the end is Daiki, and the cheerful fellow in the middle is Taisho." His teammates nodded when they were introduced, and the Otonin gave their names after. They stood in silence after that until the last team, from Kusagaku, arrived several minutes later. The boys were about 5 feet tall, although one was wiry and compact while the other one was more muscular. Both had bald heads and no shirts on, with yellowish-green pants cinched around their waist by a black belt. The girl had short green spiked hair and was a couple inches taller than her male teammates. She wore a yellow halter top under a green vest with matching green pants that hugged her curvaceous legs. Her eyebrows shot up into her bangs almost immediately after entering the clearing, and she angrily marched up to Karen, much to her teammates' confusion, before hissing in her face, "What are you doing here, traitor? We all thought you were dead." Karen smiled at the trio when recognition flashed across the boys' faces. "If it makes you feel better, I was never loyal in the first place." The wiry Kuza shinobi spit in her direction. "Screw this, Akemi-chan, let's just leave." Before they could, Jirobo stepped forward and shoved his chest out. "That's not a smart idea, trash." The 2 males glared at the imposing Otonin and he flared his chakra in response. "If you decide to leave, then you'd be defying a direct order from your superior and end up returning to your village in disgrace." "That's if we decide to let you leave, of course." His 2 teammates quickly came forward and Kitamaru stopped at his side while Sakon walked forward unconcerned and showed his back to the green-haired kunoichi. "You guys need to relax a little bit." She moved closer to him when a copy of his head popped out with an insane grin. "I wouldn't do that, girlie." Akemi let out a squeak and the sound shinobi continued walking while the head merged with his body. "So what's your guy's name?" "Natsuo," said the wiry one at the same time the muscular one responded, "Katsuo." The effeminate boy smiled at the 2. "Well then, Natsuo, Katsuo, shut the fuck up and stop complaining. Save it for somebody who cares." Sakon walked away calmly and the muscular one threw a kunai at him with impressive speed. This time a whole torso came out of his back and caught the blade before bending it to a 90-degree angle. "That wasn't very nice. Do it again and I'll devour you cell by cell." Karen sensed the 3 from Kuza were cowed by the display and started. "We'll start moving towards the tower in a zigzag path to cover as much area as possible. We should arrive sometime tomorrow and meet with the other teams to set up a perimeter. We're one of the teams farthest from the tower so we can take our time. Remember to kill every Konoha and Suna shinobi you see." Team Kakashi moved stealthily through the treetops in Training Area 44 as the sun dipped lower in the sky, hunting for any sign of another team. It had been several hours since the start of the exam, but they had only been searching for the last few. The trio decided to go a couple of miles into the forest and set up a hidden camp while everybody else was jumping around and expending energy in the initial frenzy. Now they were fresh and had an advantage over the tired ones that were probably starting to settle down. The Jinan came to an immediate stop when they heard wood clunk together in a string of muttered curses. Sai motioned for the girls to stay and snuck closer to the noise while the kunoichi waited in silence. A few minutes later a black squirrel landed on a nearby branch and signaled they should follow. The girls found their teammate in a large tree watching a lone kunoichi from Getsugaku collect firewood. Sai pulled the heaven scroll they received from his pouch and shook his head before putting it back, and the kunoichi nodded. The team wouldn't have been nominated for the exams if they let the person gathering firewood carry their scroll, so the three ninja allowed the foreign ninja to finish her task and followed in silence. She came to the edge of a clearing less than a minute later, and when her teammates asked for the password, Team 7 burst into motion. The fine edge of Sai's tanto easily sliced through the left side of the Jinan's chest. The firewood clattered together as it hit the ground while her teammates stared in horror at the blood spilling out of the large wound. Despite the shock, they were skilled enough to avoid a barrage of senbon and retaliated by launching a wave of kunai at the charging kunoichi. The girls split up to avoid the attack, and once it passed, Tamari stopped and used a kamaitachi to push their enemies into the trunk of a gigantic tree as Sakura launched a handful of poison bombs. However, they exploded into red clouds after shuriken pierced them from a variety of angles before Team Kakashi was surrounded by 6 other Jinan from 2 different villages. There was a kunoichi and 2 shinobi from Tanigakure, and the team from Ishigakure consisted of 2 kunoichi and a shinobi. The bi-village team looked around confusedly, but before they could analyze the strange alliance, it had to be defeated. Sakura threw poison bombs in a circle a couple of yards away from them before Tamari span around while swinging her fan. Their opponents were forced to jump out of the clearing, and Sai threw several smoke bombs at their feet. When the gray cloud reached its zenith, 3 forms burst from the top and were immediately pierced by a variety of shinobi tools before turning into ink. The remaining Getsu ninja shouted a warning as blades of wind burst from the smoke, but one of the tiny kunoichi couldn't react quickly enough and was bifurcated the long way. The 2 pieces of the girl's body hit the ground while her teammates shouted in rage. However, their charge was halted when an Ishi shinobi yelled, "Stop. If you run at them now, it's playing into their hand." They hesitated, and Sakura smiled before bursting into motion and rushing the Jinan from Ishigakure with poisonous needles in her right hand. The ninja were momentarily surprised by her daring charge, but were able to get into defensive stances and prepare for the attack. However, they were caught off guard when the ground around them shook and inked badgers emerged from the upturned dirt and leapt at the foreign ninja. The medic got a kunoichi with her senbon and immediately turned towards the other, confident the poison would do its job. The lone shinobi on the team retreated while going through some hand signs to support his teammate with a jutsu. However, an ink snake was in the grass at his feet and wrapped around his legs. The boy started to rush through his hand seals even faster, but momentarily paused after a kunai impaled his stomach. He tried to grit his teeth and continue through the pain, yet not even a second later the Jinan burst into a shower of gore when the exploding tag around the handle detonated. Tamari turned towards Sai with a slightly disgusted look on her face. "Don't you think that was overkill?" "No," was his one-word reply as Sakura's glowing palms hit her opponent's stomach, heart, throat, and then she clapped her hands on the girl's temples. The 4 remaining Jinan tried to run away after watching the team get demolished in a matter of moments. However, when they broke the tree line, the sound of monkeys could be heard and a troop of ink primates ambushed the retreating Jinan and wrapped them up. Their struggle to break free was ended moments later by 4 poisonous senbon. What just happened? Tamari and Sai looked at the pinkhead as she continued, "I don't understand why Jinan from 3 different villages teamed up." The pale artist sheathed his blade after cleaning it and responded in a monotone while searching the bodies. "A team from the minor village hasn't appeared in the finals for the last 3 years. They probably figured it would be easier to advance in a group." The boy held up 2 earth scrolls that he collected from the same team, and they might have been onto something. Sakura and Tamari started looking through the other corpses and found 3 heaven scrolls. They each held 2 scrolls, and the Sunakunoichi looked up at the sky. "Maybe we should skip camp and just make a dash for the tower. We could probably make it before morning." "I wouldn't advise that." The girls looked over at Sai. "The real predators come out at night, and I wouldn't assume the other teams are going to take it easy either. We may be easier to see in the daylight, but so are ambushers. Besides, I already used 2 of my prepared scrolls and need to make some more." The pinkette began rummaging through her pouches. "I agree with Sai. Based on the amount of poison bombs that I used in that fight, I'll need to make more to get through the forest too." Tamari just sighed after seeing she was outnumbered. "Fine, but I think we'd be smart to get out as quick as possible, and if I'm right, you guys will be hearing about it for a long time." Sakura was on watch and using the time to craft more poison bombs. Unfortunately, she wasn't allowed to carry the ingredients that were necessary to create the gas because they were incredibly volatile, and mixing them in an uncontrolled environment was not recommended. Instead, she had a jar filled with a goop that had the consistency of soft wax. The medic used the tip of a senbon needle to scoop a little bit of it into a container before dropping a reactant that liquefied the mixture and quickly capped it while her face twisted in disgust. She really didn't like using the liquid bombs for multiple reasons. They were about 2.5 times bigger, so it was impossible to throw more than 3 accurately. Even though the primary ingredient didn't become lethal until mixed with the reactant, it was still dangerous to touch without some sort of protection, and it wasn't efficient. Sakura had come to accept that she would end many more lives than she would save in the course of her career as a healer. However, the girl didn't have the stomach to make her opponent suffer. She even felt bad for Raiga after her actions sunk in a while later. The kunoichi gripped some bombs she just made after sensing a group approaching. They were skilled enough to cover up signs of their approach, however they couldn't control the animals that had stopped making noise. She quietly roused her teammates and the trio waited tensely until they heard a voice. "I'm telling you, their scent is all over the clearing. I'd ask you to use the Byakugan if you didn't already use it so much." Hinata-chan. Sorry, Kiba-kun. Hey, relax. I know it's bad to abuse your dojutsu, so don't worry about it. Me and Nakamaru will find them. He's right, Hinata. If it weren't for you, who knows what would have happened. The only reason we were prepared both times was the Byakugan. I don't know why Dog Breath is bragging when he couldn't detect any of the teams we came across. Not to mention he's been leading us in a big circle for half an hour. Team 7 nodded towards each other before they flipped out of their makeshift hammocks and surrounded Team 8. Take it easy, guys, we're all friends, remember? We have both scrolls anyways. Kiba had raised his hands to show he wasn't holding a weapon while Sai answered. You can say anything you want, everyone has seen the team compositions and the skills of the Hyuga and Inuzuka are well known. Until we know you or who you claim to be. The Neoperative trailed off and Kankuro sighed. I'll handle this. Tamari sleeps with a small, ouch. What the fuck, sis? I'm going to kill you, bastard, hissed the blonde through clenched teeth. Despite the fact she just attacked a member of the other team, everyone relaxed their guards. So you'll never believe what happened to us? They all looked at Kiba, except for Kankuro, who was rubbing a welt on the back of his head. You got ambushed by multiple teams from different villages. Twice. Wait, how did you know? He looked at Sakura as she put her weapons back into the well-organized holsters. Because it happened to us too. We got ambushed by 3 teams from 3 different villages. They all looked at the forest apprehensively before facing each other again. Maybe we should stick together, we already have 6 scrolls. And we have 4, said Kankuro as he adjusted the scrolls on his waist. We defeated 2 full teams, and a team of 4 from different villages, so we're beat. Let's rest for tonight and start moving again tomorrow. Then we'll start looking for other squads from Konoha and Suna to even the odds. Sounds good to me. Tamari jumped back up into the canopy and everyone else followed quickly. Nobody wanted to remain exposed longer than necessary. The Junon from Team 7 were grateful to be traveling with a tracking team. It had saved them from several conflicts so far, however the 12 chasing them now were impossible to shake. This isn't working, we should pick someplace defensible and make a stand while Sai makes some badass ink creatures to buy us a little more time to get away. Nobody had a better strategy to offer than Tamari's, so they began scanning the forest for a suitable battlefield, and eventually the 6 Junon stopped at an outcropping of rocks in front of a thick grove of trees. The approach was open enough that they'd be able to see their opponents coming while the rocks and copse of trees offered some cover. Sai slipped into the thicket with Kankuro as the shy Hyuga warned, they're almost here. Shit, Hinata and Kiba fight up front, Sakura will be mid-range while my brother and I will cover you guys at a distance. 3 puppets came out of the dense trees. His first puppet, Karasu, was in the center with its 4 arms, tattered brown cloak, 3 eyes, and spiky brown hair. On its left was a horn puppet that also had 3 eyes, matching hair and cloak, large red horns, and 6 arms called Kurori. Finally there was a massive puppet on 4 legs that vaguely looked like a salamander with a large iron mask that lay flat on its back and a long pointed chin named Sanchao. Everyone took their position as the 12 shinobi approached, and after they stopped about 20 feet away the fat one said, so you decided to stop running trash. The lipstick-wearing boy next to him smiled eagerly, about time too. I enjoy a good chase as much as the next guy, but that was starting to get ridiculous. Don't be too harsh on them, I'd run away from us too. The 12 ninja laughed when the 6-armed teenager finished and Kiba felt the hackles on the back of his neck raise at the taunt, but he knew not to start the fight. The enemy was giving Sai more time. Look at 'em all, scared stiff. Let's show a little mercy and put them out of their misery. The boy with brown hair like Kakashi raised his arm up and pointed his right palm at the 6 Shin'an standing on the outcropping of rocks. They saw the small holes in the center of his hand, and as he said Zanka, concentrated streams of wind burst out of them. The Konoha and Sunanin leapt off the boulders and Akamaru landed on Kiba's back before transforming into a copy of his owner and leaping off. The feral duo charged towards the foreign ninja with Hinata, and when they were within 10 feet of their opponents the trio jumped straight up revealing Kurori. The puppet's 6 arms folded up at the wrist and launched a wave of poisoned senbone that forced the surprised Shin'an to scatter. It charged towards the Kuza team with the other 2 puppets on its tail, intent on keeping them out of the fight. Sanshawa launched purple smoke from its mouth, which forced them farther back, then Karasu separated into pieces that had large spikes on the joints, which ferociously attacked the Kuza Shin'an so they had no chance to counter. It seemed Tamari was trying to level the forest while Kankuro kept the other team occupied, although she doubted her strongest jutsu would make much of a dent on the ancient woods. The Kunoichi repeatedly swung her battle fan and sent blast after blast of chakra-infused wind towards their enemy and scarred the trees they took cover behind. She didn't give up even though her attacks were all but useless because it kept their opponents pinned. Unfortunately for her they were shinobi and had a variety of ways to escape. Sakura shouted a warning and they looked up to see a blast of water heading towards them. A Daikamaitachi from Tamari easily dispersed the attacks, however it gave the Otonin a chance to move. The mummified shinobi was rapidly closing in with the effeminate white-haired boy and the chubby one trailing close behind. The Inuzuka duo used the Gotsuga and 2 great twisters ripped through the air towards the Otonin, but they weren't deterred. Dosa simply flicked his melody arm, which caused Kiba and Akamaru to stop spinning and fall to the ground in pain while clutching their ears. Hinata gasped at what she saw while the Otonin rushed past the dog and his master who whimpered pitifully on the ground. Zaku aimed 2 Zanka at the downed Inuzuka from a distance, however Salamander landed in front of the 2 as the iron mask lifted up and unfolded at the sides like a frill until they hit the ground, blocking the attack. Then its back opened up as a pair of Karasu's arms picked the 2 up and tossed them into the opening before the tail pulled up, creating a shielded environment. Sanshawa returned to the thicket before emerging in its original form and rejoining the other 2 puppets battling the grass team. As Kankuro saved his teammates Hinata shouted a warning to the others, that gauntlet emits sound waves that travel into the eardrum. Just because you know doesn't mean you can stop it. The hunchbacked Shin'an veered off towards the Byakugan wielder, however she widened her stance while pulling her palm back, and as Hinata thrust it forward she said, Haki Kushu. 8 trigrams vacuum palm. Dosu was surprised when a concentrated burst of air hit his stomach and sent him tumbling back to the others. He looked up after regaining his bearings to see the Hyuga had teamed up with the pink-haired girl and was directly assaulting Sakon and Jirobo while the other Kunoichi supported her with poisoned needles. The 2 shinobi were hard-pressed by the vicious assault of Juken and the deadly Senbone, however they smirked after hearing Suiten, Mijirappa, water release, wild water wave. The Otonin jumped out of the way as a high-pressure stream of water rushed towards the Hyuga, however a Kamaitachi impacted it from the side and cancelled it out. The grumpy and skinny-looking tiny nin ran towards Hinata and she met their charge while Aki went through a series of hand seals. The Kunoichi ducked under Tomio's clothesline as he flew past, then blocked the emaciated boy's surprisingly strong jab with her forearm. Daiki tried another jab with his left arm while his surly teammate was approaching her back with the intent of landing a devastating kick. Hinata started pivoting on her feet while expelling chakra from various tenketsu on her body and yelling, Kaiden. A blue sphere formed around the rapidly spinning girl knocked both boys away and blocked another Mijirappa from Aki. Hinata jumped back into formation to see the 3 younger sound ninjas around Sakura before charging the pink-haired girl, who was left on an island when the Hyuga was forced to deal with the Tani nin. She looked back at Tamari to call for help, but the blonde was diligently keeping the various web jutsu the 6-armed boy was launching at bay with her futon attacks. The blue-haired Kunoichi was about to rush forward and offer what support she could when the pink head exploded into motion. She kept the boy using the gauntlet at range with a barrage of senbone, then seemed to dance around the airstreams being launched at her, even barrel rolling between 2 before throwing some poison gas to protect her flank from the charging redhead. After that Kunoichi propelled herself towards the brown-haired shinobi who smirked and took aim once more. He said, Zanka, at the same time Sakura said Kawarimi no jutsu. The boy looked surprised when the blast of air shattered a branch and he shifted his gaze upwards when the Kunoichi on his team warned, above. 2 air blasts scattered the senbone, however they were only a feint and poison bombs were also speeding towards him. Zaku was forced to retreat as the bombs exploded into yellow smoke, and Sakura silently cursed her attack didn't work before taking stock of her supplies while flipping back into position. After finishing her count, she looked up to see the opponents were regrouping as well, and the girl took a moment to catch her breath. The pink-haired medic liked to think that in a little over a year she'd fought in some intense battles, but never anything like this. 18 ninja, 3 puppets, and a nin dog were contained in the small area they had chosen to defend and were having a death match because the scrolls obviously didn't mean anything. It was pure chaos. The pink cat noticed Karen whisper something into the fat one's ear and he smiled evilly. The boy rapidly went through a series of hand seals while his spider-like teammate shot large nets of webbing towards the Konoha-nin. Tamari easily rendered the attack useless, however it allowed Jirobo to complete the series of hand seals, and he lifted a piece of rock out of the ground in front of him that was about 50 yards long and 25 wide. The bulky Auto-nin shouted, "Dorio Dengo," and heaved the jutsu. Everybody scattered except Sakura because her sharp mind had already calculated the trajectory milliseconds after it left his hand and she knew where it would land, the copse of trees behind them. The kunoichi had already started doing the math for where she would need to hit the jutsu and at what angle. She was just hoping to generate enough force. Sakura's fist glowed blue with chakra as she smashed it into the front of the rock. Cracks spiderwebbed out from the point of impact before it burst into 15 boulders. A couple hit the grove while others went wide, and Sakura could only hope it was enough for Kankuro and Sai to dodge while biting back the pain coming from her fist. Apparently she hadn't quite mastered Tsunade's strength technique. As the pink cat fell to the ground shaking her right hand, Daiki appeared from nowhere and delivered a vicious kick to her torso. However, the girl burst into a noxious, purplish-black liquid that covered the emaciated shinobi's right leg and torso before dissolving skin and muscle. The boy was screaming of agony until Aki landed next to him before shoving a pill in his mouth, and the mutilated shinobi triumphantly roared after swallowing it. His non-existent muscles began expanding and the loose skin was slowly filled with them until it was tightly stretched over his brawny frame. The 5'10" ninja had a 26-inch neck, 53-inch chest, 34-inch thighs, and his wrists were 9 inches wide. Aki laughed when the transformation was complete. "Consider yourselves blessed to witness Danagakure no Sato's most hidden technique. Only 1 in 1,000 born in our village can survive it. A gland was surgically implanted into his body that only allows it to use the bare amount of nutrients necessary to survive at any given time, and more gets created as it's needed from the food in his stomach, at least until that pill comes into play. The gland secretes all of the enzymes it has stored and breaks down the calories, sugars, carbs, fats, and anything else in his body into huge amounts of proteins and amino acids that rapidly turn into muscle and increase his physical capabilities." Kidomaru looked in awe at the transformation as the acidic poison battled the rapid regeneration created by the technique. "So that's how he eats more than Jirobo and is still a toothpick." Daiki stared at the real Sakura when she emerged from a patch of forest that survived and rejoined her comrades. The muscular boy let out a growl and charged while his teammates moved closer as well, forming hand signs the whole way. The ground underneath the 4 shinobi turned to mud and strands rose up to grab them as the juggernaut approached. Hinata broke herself and Tamari free before the blonde partially stalled Daiki's bullrush, however more mud ropes bound the kunoichi faster than the Hyuga could destroy them as the transformed Jinan started charging once more. Suddenly a loud yahoo! Echoed through the ravaged clearing as 2 great tornadoes flew over the mud, destroying the bindings around the trapped shinobi and dispersing the viscous substance enough for them to reach solid ground. The twisters continued and bounced off Daiki before he swatted them away like flies. The Inizaka rolled back towards their comrades as poisoned Senbone fell harmlessly to the ground after failing to pierce the massive Jinan's skin. The Tani-nin roared as he advanced and cocked his right fist to deliver a devastating strike, however a large ball went into the Jinan's mouth and he instinctively swallowed. Daiki began to scream in defiance while his transformation started to slowly recede, and his teammates looked on in shock. Sakura smirked triumphantly while her left hand came back down and started to heal the broken one. "I wonder if those muscles will help him against the poison he just swallowed. It's like the one on his skin, so it should be destroying his energy source as well." Hinata and Kiba charged the stunned Tani Jinan as they looked at their down teammate, the teammate whom they thought was invincible. The Tenketsu in Aki's arms were sealed when he futilely raised them in defense against the Hyuga's assault, and while his limbs fell uselessly to his side, the kunoichi delivered a brutal palm strike to his chest. He shifted enough so it only hit a lung instead of his heart, but the boy immediately started coughing up blood when it burst and limply collapsed to the ground. Taisho wasn't faring much better against the Inuzuka, and it was becoming apparent they relied on Daiki for close-range combat. Kiba's right jab broke through the grumpy shinobi's feeble guard and broke his nose before his claws left deep gashes in the boy's neck. The feral shinobi went in for the kill while Taisho's hands came up to stem the bleeding, but he and Hinata were forced back by Tuzanku. Some of you pathetic tree huggers aren't complete trash after all. It's a nice change of pace from all the other weaklings we've already killed. The effeminate boy was about to continue when two 12-foot-tall inked behemoths emerged from the woods. They lumbered towards the Jinan from the minor village while a small patch of the thicket exploded in motion. A literal stampede made up of predatory animals, birds both big and small, mice, snakes, and many other creatures stormed past the four Jinan, and dog, in the clearing. Before they reached the shocked enemy, the ground around them exploded as 6-foot badgers emerged and tried to kill them. The Autonin began systematically slaughtering the creatures, and once the Kuza team rejoined them it was quick work, but by the time they were finished their prey had escaped and put a considerable distance between them. Karen walked over to Daiki, who was still moaning in pain, and held out her bare arm, which was scarred by bite marks, in front of his face. "Drink my blood, it has healing properties." The boy did, and he immediately returned to his normal ashy complexion instead of the sickly gray it was before. The girl allowed the other two Tani nin to drink it as well, and they began to rest peacefully when their wounds finished healing. Akemi stepped closer to Karen after the redhead finished. Her breathing was haggard, she was covered in cuts, and her complexion was incredibly pale. Her teammates Natsuo's and Katsuo's bodies were also littered with scratches, and they had the same symptoms. The lone kunoichi on the team approached with an open mouth when Karen pulled down her sleeve, laughing. "Do you think I'd waste my blood on worthless shinobi? The three of you couldn't even deal with a squad of puppets." Akemi grit her teeth. "What the hell, we're allies, bitch." The redhead smirked and walked back to the other shinobi. "Actually, we're really not. You see, we were going to kill you at some point." The three Jinan from Kuza looked shocked. "Are you really that stupid? Am I glad I was never loyal to that dump? Did you really think the higher-ups in Kusagakure would have allowed a foreign agent into the village when two factions were already vying for control?" The betrayed shinobi were about to muster their remaining strength to try and capture the girl when the ground underneath them turned to mud. Aki stood up with his hands in a seal and nodded towards Karen. "Thank you for the save, Karen-san." The kunoichi returned the nod while answering, "No problem." She then cocked her head towards the trapped ninja as strands of mud wrapped around them, and Toshio stood up holding a seal as well. "Unlike them, you actually proved your worth." The trapped Shinan glared defiantly at their captors until balls of webbing covered their heads. "You can drop the technique, they can't break my webs, and eventually all their air will run out." The Tani Shinan did, and everybody watched Kuzanin fell to their knees in the mud while desperately attempting to pull the sticky substance out of their airways. Once they stopped convulsing on the ground, Kitamura spit on them. "What a pathetic bunch, I couldn't stand to look at their faces anymore." Daiki slowly regained his feet and groaned, "I'm hungry." Aki reached into his pack before pulling out a white hunk of something that smelled awful. "Here's the emergency nutrition." The emaciated shinobi made a disgusted face at the substance, but ate it without complaint before standing up like nothing was wrong. Once everybody was ready, they looked towards Karen, and Zaku asked, "Well, which way did they go?" "I want to destroy those leaf bastards." "Get in line." The brown-haired Sound Jinan looked over and saw Toshio's surly face looking at the redhead. She pointed east. "They're in that direction. But we need to get to the tower soon. I'm sure we'll see them before the end of the test." The Jinan from Konoha and Suna didn't slow down even after their pursuers were well out of Hinata's Byakugan's range. They made a beeline for the tower after putting considerable distance between them and the Autonin, only adjusting their course after the girl saw her cousin's team in a fight against 12 shinobi while trying to defend 3 fallen Jinan. They got closer to the scene to see Neji and Lee each fighting 4 ninja in close quarters, while Tenten kept the remaining 4 at bay with a seemingly endless rain of steel. Lee ducked under a boy's kick before hitting him into one of the foreign Jinan with a kick of his own. He then turned and delivered a brutal chop to a charging boy's neck, breaking it and killing him, before spinning around a running jab from the other Jinan and kicking him backwards. The ninja on top of the other 2 who were trying to untangle themselves. "Yos, I shall defeat my opponents first, Neji, I'm already ahead." The long-haired Hyuga didn't respond vocally, however he did move with more urgency while fighting his set. It appeared that Team Guy already had the fight won, however it was guaranteed when Teams 7 and 8 joined in. Their combined strength easily overpowered the surprised Jinan. The 3 older Konoha nin walked over to their friends and Tenten smiled, "Thanks guys, this forest is pretty dangerous. I'd say it more than lives up to the name." Neji nodded in agreement. "Indeed, it seems the smaller villages are tired of getting pushed around. We've come across several slaughtered teams, all from Konoha or Suna. Surprisingly, Lee didn't mention anything about the competition or interference ruining it. Instead, the bowl-cut shinobi stared forlornly at the bloody leaf nen and sighed when the surviving member's chest stopped rising seconds later. Tenten stared blankly at the bodies before looking away and trying to convince herself they weren't there, while Neji stoically watched as Sakura confirmed their deaths and closed their eyes. The boy seemed unaffected, but the anger rolling off his body was palpable. Tenten turned away from the scene and faced the 6 Shinon. "So what brings you guys to our neck of the woods?" The two by-village teams were shaken out of their stupor and remembered their last encounter with foreign shinobi. Kankuro looked back at the eerie forest and tightly gripped the scrolls his puppets were sealed in. "We actually just fought 12 shinobi ourselves before escaping. The 6 from sound are pretty tough, and there's a tani nin that's strong too." Neji activated his Byakugan and extended its range as far as he could. "I don't see anyone. Perhaps they decided to go after some easier targets." The branch Hyuga was about to continue when Sai interrupted. "I sent out ink mice to locate Konoha and Suna Shinobi when I released all those animals, and they've located Team 10. We should hurry and meet up with them before doing anything else." Everybody nodded and followed the pale artist as he took to the trees. The 9 Jinan reached Team 10 quickly and found them horrified at what could only be described as a massacre. Wide slashes of blood covered the ground and trees in the area, while various organs and limbs were spread around the foul-smelling clearing, along with 4 bodies of contestants from minor villages. The 3 mutilated bodies of the Konoha team were crucified to the trunk of a gigantic tree, so it appeared they were hugging it. Ino was on her knees and appeared completely distraught. Her red eyes and cheeks indicated she had been crying. Kuji looked incredibly lost as he stared at the gruesome scene. His skin was tinted green and the Akimichi wasn't eating any food. There was also a large pile of vomit next to him that contained various snacks. Shikamaru's left fist was tightly clenched and his usually lazy eyes were hard with anger, while his right hand gently rubbed his blonde teammate's back. "I'm sorry, Ino. I wish we didn't have to do this, I really do. But following the killer's trail is the best way to make sure we don't run into them ourselves. This looks pretty old, so we can probably start moving directly towards the tower, although I don't know if I want to after seeing this." The distressed girl hiccuped as the other 9 Jinan walked into the clearing in various states of shock. Team Guy had seen several teams left for dead, but this was easily the worst, and the other 2 teams had been spared the gruesome sight of dead comrades until meeting up with the older nin. Tenten looked horrified as her hand came up and covered her mouth while tears leaked from her brown orbs. The Kunoichi doubted she could make herself forget this anytime soon, if ever. Neji's pearl eyes narrowed dangerously at the scene, while Lee seemed to fall into himself in depression. Kiba had already thrown up after entering the clearing because the stench was too much for his sensitive nose and was already a good distance away. Hinata collapsed to her knees much like Ino did and began shaking her head and whispering no while her salty tears hit the grass. Even Kankuro and Tamari, who had seen Gaara mutilate scores of people, were abhorred by the sadistic display and had to look away. A look of pure shock momentarily appeared on Sai's face before his eyes fell and posture slumped. The boy felt something wet on his cheeks and touched them with his left hand. When he pulled it back, his fingers were damp and he wondered what was going on. Sakura had immediately gone up and kneeled next to Ino, shedding silent tears with her friend. None of the 12 know how long they sat in shock, completely silent. And despite no words being said, they all felt themselves growing closer because of the tragedy, and if any one of them spoke at the moment it would be the same thing: "If these fuckers want a war, then we'll give them one." And after a depressing ending to the chapter, I bequeath upon ye an omake. They are all related to the story, unless stated otherwise, however aren't important. Master and pupil walked down a dusty road in the middle of the countryside. The young boy was blond with a plain black bandana that came down to cover his left eye, a black cloth face mask, an orange and black jacket with a high collar, matching pants, and black shinobi sandals. His sensei was a tall man, and slightly more eccentric. The man wore wooden geta, then fishnet covered his lower shins until it met his olive green pants, which matched his shirt under a bright red vest. Fishnet was visible where the shirt dipped, and also on the end of his forearms where leather padding protected his knuckles. The man had waist-length white hair that was completely uncontrollable with a large scroll on his back. Perhaps the strangest thing was the fact he was wearing fake glasses with black dots for pupils that had a plastic nose and phony mustache attached. The blonde boy kept stealing glances at his mentor and sweat dropping. "Damn it, Hura-senin, aren't we supposed to be incognito? That's the worst disguise ever. Please Gaki, I'm a legendary ninja. You're 100 years too early to give me any pointers." The blonde deadpanned at his teacher's answer. "So you're one of the Sannin, and you still think that's going to work?" Jiraiya was about to respond and defend himself when they finally saw another traveler on the road, something they hadn't seen in days. It was a pudgy farmer with a thick black mustache wearing a loose-fitting white tank top and tan shorts. The hefty man was pulling a cart by himself that appeared to be loaded up, but was covered by a tarp so it was impossible to see what he was carrying. He gently set his load down and wiped his forehead before greeting the duo, "Howdy strangers." He didn't spare Naruto a second glance and the boy gave his master a cocky grin when the farmer began investigating Jiraiya closely. "Hey! That's a really nice mustache." The Chunin face planted when the man finished speaking and the sage grinned cheesily while gently pulling on the left side of his phony facial hair. "Why thank you, I've been perfecting it for years. You have quite an impressive one yourself though." The man began running his hands on both sides of his mustache as well while they continued the conversation. "You should enter the annual mustachioed and bearded men competition held in Tano Kuni. It's always a good time and a great opportunity to pick up great information and tips." "Thanks, that sounds like a good time." Jiraiya and the farmer bowed simultaneously and the man picked up his cart before setting off once more. Naruto regained his feet and stared at the chubby man's back. That guy was drunk or the sun was getting to him. There's no way he could have thought that was real. The Sennin smiled at his pupil while taking the glasses off. "Nope, they're just as awesome as I am." The man started wiping them on his sleeve before they broke apart at the bridge. Naruto was laughing at the crying man and he sharply turned on the boy. "Don't laugh, those glasses were much better than your Kakashi imitation. We should hurry though, somebody might recognize me now that my disguise is ruined." "No way, you were hardly even in the movie because you're so lazy you big perv. Now listen here." Jiraiya grabbed the blonde's face mask and started pulling. Unfortunately it wasn't made of shinobi grade material like Kakashi's and ripped as well. Naruto was the one with tears in his eyes this time while his mentor giggled, and after a brief scuffle the duo was on the road once more. To their surprise past another group of people an hour or so later, a large trading caravan consisting of several families. Families with teenage girls who were avid movie watchers. They stared awestruck at the duo and Jiraiya grinned triumphantly while the blonde tried to hide behind his sensei's muscular legs. "Oh my god, it's Naruto-kun." In the brief silence that followed the sage covered his mouth and said in a high-pitched voice, "And the gallant Jiraiya-sama." Nobody paid him any heed because seconds later the girls burst into motion and trampled the sage before chasing his pupil around the clearing. The man moaned pitifully on the ground while lamenting, "Why does everyone forget about me all the time? I'm awesome too, right?" In a clearing nearly half a mile away from the tower in the center of Training Area 44 was a small camp set up where the oppressive trees thinned, affording the occupants a glimpse of the sky. A red-headed girl sat with her eyes closed and thirstily gulped water from a canteen while taking a moment to relax on a log near the remnants of a small fire. The sun had just started peeking over the horizon on the last day of the second stage, and from what Karen was sensing there would be no teams from either Konoha or Suna advancing to the third. The Kunoichi was constantly scanning for approaching chakras and hadn't felt any foreign ones in the last day and a half. She was beginning to think the other teams were either dead or found a hole to cower in until the proctors rescued them. The mental picture of Leaf Shinan squeezed together and quivering in fear caused a sadistic grin to flash across the Otonin's face for a moment, at least until she remembered it was a Pyrrhic victory for the minor villages. Only 45 of the 126 Shinan that represented their alliance remained. So if they managed to kill every enemy shinobi in the forest, which she highly doubted, then their forces still died at a ratio greater than 1-to-1 despite outnumbering the contestants from major villages. Karen put her canteen down with a sigh and used the Kagura Shingon, mind's eye of the Kagura, to see the allied Shinan spread around the forest along with those in camp with her. The other 5 from Sound, the Tani team, and Team Shigure from Ame decided to join the fun as well. When everybody arrived on the second day they spread out evenly and formed a perimeter around the tower to stop Konoha and Suna teams from advancing. However, several enemy squads almost slipped through the weaker teams, so now the 12 of them were responsible for one half while the remaining 33 patrolled the other. The redhead's eye snapped open and she looked east before talking to her teammates who were preparing breakfast. "There are 12 chakra sources approaching. 6 we've encountered before, and the other 6 don't feel like pushovers either." Zaku and Dosu excitedly roused the others and quickly explained the situation. As they talked, vicious smiles to spread across the other Oto and Tiny Nin's face, attesting to their eagerness for a rematch. Daiki's gray eyes gleamed maliciously, and the anticipation was apparent in his raspy voice when he echoed everyone's thoughts. "I can't wait." The corpses of fallen shinobi were becoming more numerous as the 12 Shinan from Konoha and Suna traveled deeper into the forest of death. Some were picked to the bone by the many scavengers that patrolled the woods, while others were so bloated and decomposed they had to move around the area because of Kiba's sensitive nose. However, the gruesome scenes only gave the group extra motivation for the battle they knew was coming. Shikamaru traveled in the center of the formation while scanning their surroundings with a grim face. He noticed the forest was starting to become more open, which allowed him to see the top of the tower in the distance. Realizing they were moving closer to the enemy, he held up a hand and called out, "Stop." Everyone listened to the command and came to an immediate halt, surprised by the authority lacing the boy's usually weary tone. "We're getting closer to the tower now, so we need to stay on guard." The Nara turned to face each of his comrades with a hard look in his eye. Lee's frown and defeated posture was the most striking thing at that moment. It looked completely unnatural to Shikamaru. Still, he knew that Daijutsu specialist could be counted on because of the determined way his jaw was set and the silent fury smoldering in his charcoal orbs. Tenten had been especially quiet these last few days, and even now it was hard to gauge what she was feeling. The way she was fiddling with the weapon scroll betrayed her hidden anxiousness. Kuji's face was darkened with rage, something that Shikamaru had never seen on his jolly friend's features. The lethargic genius almost felt sorry for their enemies, and after seeing the murderous fury in Ino's sky-blue eyes he did for a moment. Even if they knocked the kunoichi out of the fight, her mouth would continue to emasculate them. Kiba's eyes seemed feral as he gazed towards the tower with hate burning in his slit pupils. He stopped staring and turned to Kankuro after the puppeteer clapped a hand on the Inuzuka's shoulders with a grim look on his face and nodded. Hinata stood near her teammates for support, but she wasn't sinking into herself at the thought of the coming battle. The girl didn't appear to be excited for the bloodshed, but there was an air of acceptance about her. The Hyuga heir would not cower or hide. The members of Team 7 shared a quick glance before nodding in unison. They all knew the stakes and what was ahead. Sai's lips were set in a grim line as he rolled up the scroll he was working on, while Sakura began counting her supplies with a grim look on her face, while Tamari walked over to her brother and squeezed his arm. The two San siblings seemed to communicate silently with their eyes before embracing each other tightly for a brief moment. Shikamaru's gaze shifted to Neji when the branch Hyuga spoke with a tone that was as cold as his posture. The Hyuga boy hadn't said much in the past couple days, but his fury seemed to electrify the air around him. 12 shinobi are approaching our position. 3 have incredible chakra, 3 are above average, 5 are around Jinan level, and 1 has less chakra than an academy student. Sakura's emerald orbs met the milky white of the Byakugan as she shook her head. The person with the weakest chakra has the kinjutsu that greatly increases his capabilities. We shouldn't underestimate any of them. Shikamaru nodded and crouched before he put his left knee on the tree branch, then he placed his thumbs and fingers together in a circle. The boy closed his eyes and took a deep breath as a vein throbbed above Tamari's left eye. "This isn't the time to sleep, lazy ass." Kuji popped a bag of chips open and began munching on the contents, trying to get some last-second calories before the fight. "He's thinking, not sleeping. Shikamaru's the smartest guy I know, and he'll definitely think of a way to get us through this. DCH, whatever." Tamari put her sharp mind to work and tried to think of a strategy, but the Nara stood up before she could finish analyzing the situation. This whole thing was never about the scrolls. Everything was a setup from the beginning. The Jinan stared at Shikamaru as he continued explaining. The shinobi's brow was furrowed while his eyes appeared to be staring at a complex diagram on the tree behind them. "One of them has to be a censor. Based on how they followed you in the scene before the exams, it's the only logical explanation." "Wait, what?" The Nara turned towards Kankuro, who looked confused at his deduction. It would be pretty hard to track an Inuzuka and Hyuga in a forest as dense as this one, if not impossible, but the way they broke up the preliminary test is what really convinced me. Those 3 from Sound should have never been there. They came from the gym. And there's a 3rd floor access in there. Right, Shikamaru nodded towards Ino after she cut in. They wanted all those teams in the exam for the survival part. This is no longer a fight for promotion. Now we're battling for our lives and to avenge our fallen comrades. It's time to fight dirty. They just retreated about 100 yards, and I'm assuming the area in front of them is heavily trapped. Everyone stopped when Karen broke the silence. "We can easily bypass it and surround them though." Sakan nodded. "Good idea. You guys take the Tani team and loop around the right while the rest of us circle to the left. Once you get halfway around, split into your normal teams and box them in." Karen wasn't really paying attention because she felt numerous chakra sources in the sky, but none of them were large enough to be a person, so it was probably some sort of spying technique. Of course, it was impossible to peer through the thick canopy created from the imposing trees in the Forest of Death, so it was nothing but a wasted effort. Although why would they need a spying jutsu when they have a Hyuga? Sakan grit his teeth when he noticed the redhead was staring upwards with a vacant look in her eyes. He was about to repeat the instructions when she frantically dove behind a nearby tree while yelling, "Scatter!" Countless spiked metal balls burst through the thick green leaves and exploded into thousands of pieces of shrapnel. Nobody escaped unscathed, however they all made it behind cover before getting hit by one of the larger pieces. "They're coming from above." Jirobo sped through a series of hand seals before ripping a large chunk of rock from the earth that was easily 6 times as large as he was. Karen started trailing the chakra sources with her index finger and the pudgy boy launched the massive projectile that ripped through the trees, which allowed growing sunlight to shine through the hole and onto the forest floor perhaps for the first time in years. Sai dove underneath the boulder as Tamari jumped off the ink bird and opened her battle fan to glide down, however Saku shot several air blasts that forced her to close it and she violently tumbled across the ground. Dosa hopped into the crater made by Jirobo's Doryodango and sped towards the stunned blonde while revealing his melody arm, but he was forced to stop and use the gauntlet to deflect a barrage of senbon instead. The shinobi let out a growl and hopped backwards as several poison bombs exploded at his feet, coating his jacket with black goo. The noxious liquid began eating through the cloth and the boy tossed it aside, revealing his torso was completely bandaged as well. Sakura lifted Tamari off the ground after her attack as Sai landed next to them gracefully with an unrolled scroll that released a pride of ink lions. The animals charged across the destroyed ground as Dosa jumped back to his teammates, but the predators were dispelled by a storm of needles that was getting closer to the trio in the open as 3 voices echoed, "Juro Senbon." A wind blast from Tamari deflected the rain of steel causing the Almei shinobi to curse silently. As the 3 were about to pull out more umbrellas they found it impossible to move their bodies, then their heads started turning to the left against their will. The older teens struggled against it with everything they had, but their necks didn't stop twisting until they were looking at a brown-haired boy with a ponytail that was standing on the same branch as them and facing the opposite way. The Genon's hands were clasped together in a rat seal, and there was a tense smile on his face while he said, "A little advice in case you get reincarnated. Don't yell out your attack while hiding, it kind of defeats the purpose." Team Shigure found they could move again milliseconds before getting squashed like a trio of gnats when a massive fist crashed into them, sending their end of the branch hurtling towards the earth as gore splattered everywhere. The Nara lazily wiped the side of his face before waving at Kuuji as the boy's arm returned to normal size. The Akimichi rubbed his fist on the ground to clean it and nodded back before moving to his next location while his oldest friend scanned the battlefield. The 2 Hyuga were doing their part in directing their teams as they performed hit-and-run tactics on the stronger enemies from cover. Team 7 was able to keep most of them engaged in the open, and Team 10 picked off anyone on the perimeter. Shikamaru knew the sensor would stop to group everyone up after they retreated, so he had Sai and Tenten prepare an ambush that would lead the attack and create chaos. It worked brilliantly so far and they were able to seize the advantage from the start. Of course the funny thing about momentum was that it often changed sides. The lazy genius cursed when he saw Kiba take a ferocious hit after more arms emerged from the girly shinobi's wrist and curved around the Inuzuka's block. The dog user managed to push one of them out wide, but it opened a hole in his guard and the other hit him with a fierce uppercut to the jaw. Sakan then pivoted to deliver a spinning kick as the arms went back into his body before emerging from his ankles. They pulled Kiba back towards the Otonin after his shinobi sandal hit the feral boy's kidney and the effeminate teen's foot came down hard, delivering a ruthless heel drop into the back of Kiba's head that smashed it into the dirt. The Sound Nin was preparing to finish the down Jinan with a brutal stomp when a palm encased in jagged chakra hit his kidney. The boy grunted and stumbled backwards a couple steps as Sakura pulled back her left hand while spinning to the right. She hit the injured organ with her left shin as the effeminate teenager gasped and hunched over in pain. Then the medic pivoted on her heel and rotated the other way, ducking under Sakan's desperate jab, before delivering a crushing blow to the effeminate shinobi's ribcage with her gloved fist that sent him flying back towards his teammates with a sickening crack. The rest of Team 8 landed around the medic to protect her while she began a diagnosis. Kiba has a fractured ulna, broken ribs, and a possible concussion. There's nothing I can do for him right now, but his injuries aren't life-threatening. Can you guys get him out of here? I don't think so. The 4 turned to see a hulking behemoth rushing towards them with an eager grin. Sakura didn't wait for an answer and sped past them as Salamander opened to extract Kiba from the battlefield. Her left fist met Daiki's right and the Kunoichi's chakra-enhanced strength allowed the girl to hold her ground against the muscular shinobi. The pinkette slid her palm onto the back of his hand and used it to flip over his kick before trying to pierce his skin with a poisoned senbon in her other hand. The tip bent uselessly on the steely muscles, so Sakura pushed herself airborne and flipped over the brawny Jinan as his left fist came across her previous position in a sweeping hook. 3 poison bombs exploded across her opponent's wide back causing Daiki to hiss in agony, but the wound was already healing and consuming the acidic poison. The juggernaut ignored the throbbing pain as he spun around and retaliated by hitting the annoying girl with a jab as she crossed her arms defensively. Fortunately the kunoichi was able to reinforce her limbs with chakra so they didn't shatter, but the blow sent her tumbling across the ground helplessly while pain flared up and down her arms. Daiki saw his opportunity and charged with a raised fist, reminding himself to keep his mouth closed. Green eyes widened after registering the behemoth's charge, and if possible they widened even farther when he pulled up in pain. The physically enhanced Taninan's giant hands came up to cover his scorched eyes while he grunted in agony and Dino triumphantly landed in front of the pinkette. She was holding a whip that was smoking at the end and snapped it tauntingly, causing a wisp of fire formed at the tip. Well, forehead. Looks like you need a hand from the best kunoichi in Konoha. I can't help myself more than I already am, Ino, replied Sakura as she got to her feet. The girls matched smirks before turning towards their muscular opponent as the scarring around his eyes healed. Watch and learn. Hey, I said it first. Stop doing that. Kitamura spat a handful of large web nets towards Kankuro as he retreated with Kiba. The Sunanin cursed and knew he wouldn't be able to outrun the attack, however two forms jumped above him and intercepted the attack, getting wrapped up by the nets. The bundles fell to the ground with a thud, and though one lump futilely struggled to free itself from the sticky threads, the net was easily shredded, revealing Hinata. She jumped to her feet and turned to meet the spider-like boy's charge, however he was kicked away as Neji landed gracefully in front of her. The older boy turned and gave the kunoichi a small smile before charging towards Kitamura, but the Oto Nin bit his thumb and summoned a colony of spiders that scurried towards the Hyuga as their master retreated and chuckled darkly. Neji hopped backwards and took a defensive stance to fight the summons, however dozens of explosive kunai rained onto the large swarm and detonated, killing a majority of the group. After the death of their brethren, several larger spiders angrily dashed out of the woods in front of an enormous one, but Lee blurred into the middle of them fearlessly and started hitting the arachnids with devastating blows that killed many in one shot. Yosh, Shikamaru has directed us to exterminate the spiders so you can safely take out their master. We shall finish our task before you or I shall do 1,000 push-ups in 10 minutes. Neji didn't answer his eccentric teammate verbally, instead the Hyuga just gave him a quick nod before chasing after the spider-like boy. Seeing that her cousin's team had things handled, Hinata freed Akamaru and scanned the battlefield with her dojutsu. She found the gauntlet using boy and put the dog on the ground while saying, "Go guard Kiba-kun Akamaru. I have to fight the bandaged one, and Kankuro will probably be busy too." The dog let out a yip to let her know he understood and sped off while the midnight-haired kunoichi rushed towards her assigned opponent. The sound Janan with implanted tubes in his arms and his bandaged teammates stared cockily at Kuji, who faced them from across the clearing they stood in. The Akimichi was originally with Ino, but she kept glancing in Sakura's direction with a worried look on her face. He knew the blonde wouldn't be completely focused on the battle, so let her go, but that left him facing two enemies alone. "Well, what do we have here? Looks like a weak little sapling all by himself," taunted Zaku. His teammate appeared to smirk under his bandages before responding, "I wouldn't call this one little, just weak." Of course the mummified Janan abruptly stopped his insult mid-sentence and jumped backwards while snapping his head to the left. The ground in front of him cracked as a pressurized burst of air hit, and Dosu glared at the blue-haired kunoichi as she landed near the Akimichi and skid across the dirt. Kuji smiled gratefully at the Hyuga's back and she inclined her head towards him without looking away from the two sound nin. "I'll take the one with the gauntlet, I can see his attacks." The Akimichi nodded before responding, "All right Hinata, I'll leave him to you." She charged towards Dosu and forced him out of the clearing with a fierce Juken assault while Zaku faced the remaining Konoha Janan with a vicious grin. "Well, looks like I'll get to skin the fatty by myself." Steam poured out of Kuji's ears as he brought his hands together in a seal. "I'm not fat, I'm big-boned." By Kano Jutsu, the portly shinobi turned into a massive ball as his arms and legs retracted into the sphere. Hot air burst from the openings they created and propelled the Akimichi towards Zaku while he screamed, "Chubby's rule." The Oto Nin's eyes widened in surprise as he brought his arms up to defend himself. "Chubby and fat mean the same thing, idiot." Zanku Kankuro placed Kiba in between the roots of a large tree and hastily turned around while drawing a kunai after hearing a branch break, although he used the motion to covertly hook a chakra string onto Karasu. The Sunajinan breathed a sigh of relief when his teammate's dog jumped out of the bushes and pocketed the blade. "Geez Akamaru, don't sneak up on me like that. Go stay with Kiba and keep watch, I'll be the first line of defense." The canine yipped in understanding and jumped into the hole while Kankuro started towards a defensive position he eyed out. However, the puppeteer barely made it 50 feet before pulling Sanshao in front of him to block a wave of mud. The viscous liquid broke around the puppet's mask and frill as its master stood safely behind it, glaring at two forms standing on a tree branch in front of him. Taisho glowered at the boy from the limb while Aki held his hands in a seal and said, "You won't be going much farther soon, Nin. Prepare to witness the power of Tanigakure. Our village has sat in the shadow of yours far too long and it's time to rectify that." Kankuro smirked at the two Jinan. "You know, there's a good reason why the shithole you live in survives on the Sand Village's scraps." Kurori and Karasa burst out of a tree near the river Shinobi and split them up with a barrage of poisoned kunai. The puppeteer continued his assault while retreating into a defensive position in front of Kiba. It's because Suna Shinobi are superior, however I wouldn't discount how pathetic Tanis are either. It looks like things are breaking off. Tamari turned towards Sai as he muttered the statement. "There's only 2 left for us." "How do you know that?" The pale artist looked at his confused teammate before nodding towards an ink mouse scurrying by their feet. "Right, so who is it?" Sai didn't have the chance to answer because they had to jump away as the ground beneath them morphed into a field of earth spikes. Sakon rushed at the ink user, but Tamari launched a blast of wind that pushed the effeminate shinobi into a large copse of trees. The kunoichi took off after the green-haired teenager while shouting, "I'll take the close-range fighter while you deal with the fat one. I don't even think my attacks could move him." The knee agent faced Jirobo with a disarming grin. "Do you find women running away from you to be a common experience? What does that have to do with anything trash?" Sai kept smiling at the fuming sound Nin. "I'll take that as a yes. You see, I was just wondering if being outrageously fat affected the way men interacted with the opposite sex. It probably has to do with the fact that women can't find your penis under all the flab." The pale shinobi felt the pressure around him increase as Jirobo flared his chakra angrily. "I was going to kill you anyways, but now it's going to be slow." The boy was unfazed as the meaty ninja charged towards him. "You're not the first to say that. Actually, that's what most people say to me." Shikamaru watched over the battlefield from his perch on a large branch and cursed as the fight spread out. The Nara knew no plan survived first contact with the enemy, but he was hoping the battles would remain close enough so he could maintain some sort of control over the situation. It was a good thing they had a plan for this scenario too. The boy sighed while trying to locate the person sneaking up on him. "At least the strategy allowed us to get a number advantage." Shikamaru tilted his head to the left as a shuriken sliced through the air inches from his neck. Then he took a step to the right as a red-headed kunoichi flew past him. She turned around angrily with a glare on her face while pulling out a kunai in the backhand grip. "Most people would have done more to dodge those attacks, you know. I'm not most people. It would have been too much work to move more than I had to." Shikamaru cracked his neck. "Man, this is such a drag." "What, that I'm going to kill you?" replied the kunoichi while smirking cockily. "No, of the 12 possible opponents I could have fought, it turns out to be the one woman. I had a 91% chance of not fighting a girl, but I ended up having to anyways. Troublesome." Karen growled indignantly at the lazy boy before regaining her composure. "I promise to kill you quickly, so if you don't want to work you can just let me do it. You're going to die anyways." The Nara sighed while looking at the girl. "As tempting as that sounds, I'll have to turn you down. If my ancestors found out a woman killed me they would be ashamed, and dealing with prissy family members for eternity in the afterlife sounds awful. Especially if any of them are like my mom. Although maybe they'd cut me some slack because you're a censor." The kunoichi grinned wickedly in response. "Oh, you're a smart guy to figure that out, although that's not that surprising considering you're a Nara." Shikamaru narrowed his eyes at the girl as she continued, "Did you really think they wouldn't brief us about possible enemies that we might face? I know that your clan has a talent for outsmarting opponents and uses shadow jutsu, but I can't be caught by surprise. I know whenever you use chakra and can track your jutsu without seeing them." The lazy genius sighed. "Don't be cocky, it's not like you're a jounin or something. And here I thought blondes were the stupid ones." Karen snarled and burst into motion, launching towards the Konohanin with her kunai pulled back to strike. However, Shikamaru just swung down from the branch and left an explosive surprise. The redhead twisted around the trunk of the tree and pressed herself against it as the tag blew on the other side, sending the limb flying to the ground while starting a small fire. The kunoichi growled and started climbing higher after sensing the chakra in Shikamaru's shadow jutsu. She circled around the gnarled tree and launched a handful of shuriken towards the Nara while flipping off the trunk. The shinobi dropped his hand seal and jumped backwards to avoid the attack before responding with a barrage of kunai as Karen landed. She burst into motion and easily weaved between them while running towards the Konohanin, but gasped when Shikamaru formed the sign of the ram. The sensor could feel his chakra flowing into the tags before they activated, creating quick bursts of light that elongated her shadow. The Nara had a small smile on his face after capturing the kunoichi while she glared angrily. "So what? Now I have to copy you, but there's not much you can do in the middle of a clearing that can only hurt me." This is only the beginning though. Kage Kubashibari no Jutsu. Shadow neck binding technique. The Nara's shadow started to snake up Karen's body as the top morphed into a hand that wrapped around her slender neck. But when it squeezed, the girl burst into water and he heard, Suten, Ha and Ryu. Shikamaru could only turn his head before a torrent of water slammed into his back and sent him careening towards a tree. The boy smashed against the bark and grunted in pain as it splintered beneath him. To make matters worse, several kunai hit the tree around his body with burning tags attached to the handles and exploded, sending flames, smoke, and shards of wood around the clearing. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.